All right, we're going to get started now on making a Hawley type retainer that will have a labial bow and some clasp to hold it in place. The first step before you start bending wire and doing things, you want to prep the model and make sure that any bubbles, anything that you need to carve out of the way, you do that first. Now, generally in orthodontics, when you're making a retainer, it's after we're done with treatment, so a lot of times we have tissue that's hypertrophied, and we need to trim that away in areas so the wire sits in the right spot. So the first thing I will do is, where the labial bow comes between the cuspid and the first bicuspid, I want to trim that tissue down. You do not want to be too aggressive. You actually want to kind of get it back to what you would think it'd be normal if there was no inflammation or no swelling. And then if you have any areas in between the teeth where tissue is swollen up, especially in the anterior, you want to just trim that down. That's where the labial bow is going to be coming across there. So again, you want to come in here and just do some very, very light trimming, making sure that you've got an area where the wire is going to come through. And then any bubbles on the inside there along the tissue, you want to come in here and gently knock those off. You do not want to try to change any of the tissue that's on the lingual of the model. Any changes you make on the tissue part of it, it's going to be on the outside labial buccal. Once you're done with that, then you want to come in. Here we'll be doing a ball clasp between the first bi and second bi, so I will actually go in there and remove quite a bit of the tissue in there, because again, I want that ball clasp to be seated interproximal between those. And again, it's not going to be something that's going to be way deep, go way gingival on that, but again, you want to remove enough to where that ball clasp will sit into that spot. So once you've got the model prepared and stuff, now we can go ahead and start bending wire. And where I generally will start is what we call the labial bow. I always use 028 wire. You can use 030, 036. I wouldn't use anything less than 028. It starts to get a little more fragile and it gets bent out of the way easy. I'm really kind of at the light end as far as the wire I use. Most places will tend to use an 030 or 036 at times. So when we start with the labial bow, basically I always want to start on one side and work my way to the other side. So my first bend, nice straight piece of wire, my first bend is going to be that initial loop. So I'm going to take the wire, grab it approximately about an inch or so. You just want to leave enough wire here so it can go into the pallet. And I will simply make a U-bend. Basically something that looks along that lines. I use a special plier to do that. It's got a barrel shape to it, so it makes a really nice U for me, and it's very, and I always like using this, and nice and uniform. Then I'll come back in, and I want to make sure that at this point, these two lengths are parallel to one another. Now we may change it as we go through that. So right now, basically we have this portion of this made. Now I want to bend the part of wire that's going to go across the front of the labial part of those anterior teeth. Generally I will go approximately that much. You want to have this labial bow where it seats in here. You want to have it on the tissue. You want to have that bottom part of the U on a tissue. You don't want it sitting up here, but you also don't want it sitting down there. So basically you want to have it where it's just overlapping the tissue at 2-3 millimeters. If it's too short, it'll actually can push into that marginal tissue. If it's too long, it can get out in the vestibule, start poking the person, makes it uncomfortable. So there's kind of that little bit of a sweet spot. So generally I'll get it to where I want it, and then I'll make a mark with an arch marker. And here I'm making my mark at approximately the mid-crown level. That is, I want to make a mark so that wire is right about mid-crown. So my bend there, and then I make my initial bend. So you end up with that piece of wire just like that, and that's going to be that part of that labial bow. Now the next part I'm going to be doing is bending that wire so it fits along the labial surface of all the anteriors. And basically I will just start out placing a very slight curve in the wire. Along that lines, and I'll come back in here and I'll try it in place. So you can see here now, you know, it's not too bad across here. And this is something you don't have to have it absolutely super perfect hitting the whole surface. You basically want to make sure that, you know, you're getting some contact along each and every tooth. But also you want to maintain this as a nice gentle curve. You do not want to have any flat spots, any places where there's a point. You know, you're looking at having a nice gentle flat curve, and I just keep working my way along the wire, keep bending it in that nice curve shape. I keep holding it on here as I keep working it. And one thing you'll find is you want to bend a little bit. Try it on the model. So that's one of the rules I always keep for myself, is I always check it a lot. So it's something I just, you know, I kind of bend a little bit. I'm always checking, seeing how that wire's fitting along here. So as you can see, I keep working here. Now I'm right about here. And I think the biggest thing you need to learn when you're bending wire is patience. You got to just, you know, it's something just, you work slowly at it. It's something that, you know, you really can't do very fast, especially when you're initially learning. So it's something that you know, you've got to just be patient with. So again, I'm just keep working. I'm looking at seeing how that's there. And I'm always trying to hold this wire in the same spot. And that always, by holding the same spot, that lets me know, hey, where I need to keep making my changes. But again, this is something that at this point you really want to just have a nice gentle curve that's really going to follow that arch form that you have with your teeth. Almost there. So again, you want to just keep working and end up with a nice gentle curve, okay? And it's really something that's going to follow the curve of that arch. So when I go ahead and place this, on here, again, it's following that curve along that whole anterior. The other thing that you do, and you want to make sure as you're doing this and holding it, I will always make sure that, you know, when I hold it, I want to make sure that, you know, this portion of the wire is really at least at the mid crown, mesial to distal. And also you want to make sure that this leg is positioned so it's going to go in between that cuspid and that bi. And once we get to start bending this wire in between the cuspid and bi, that's where we can make some changes at the loop, making it bigger, making it smaller, depending on how we need to position that, so that we always have that wire at least to the mid crown on the cuspid, and that wire that is going to go between the cuspid and bicuspid is positioned to go interproximal between those two. So right now, yes, I've got this really nice. I'm right over here, so I'm holding it here where I want here, and this is now where I will make this mark at the cuspid. Again, right about mid crown. Up until now, this has all been, you know, just fitting it on. Now when we make this bend, it really sets the size of the labial bow. So it's really important that you are careful. You take your time at this point, because again, if you position this wrong, it's kind of tough to recover from. So you want to make sure that you hold the wire in the right spot. And again, we're coming in here and making that loop. And now we have ended up with something that's, you know, looks a lot more like a labial bow. At this point, I trim off any excess wire. So now, got a labial bow. I always then, let's go make sure that fits where I want. So again, I still see a little bit of gapping right there, a little bit of wire, so I need to bend a little more there. Because as you bend, make other bends. As I made this loop in here, I actually bent this a little bit out of the way. So that's why you always want to be checking, making sure that, you know, you've got this in the right position. When you're holding it in the one spot, you want to hold it lightly. Do not want to hold it firmly. If you hold it firmly, it's going to change how that wire sits there. You really want to make sure this is fairly passive at this point. But again, I always try to get myself where I'm holding it in the same spot. That's why I can be consistent in where I'm doing things. Just a little bit more right there at the cuspid. And again, checking and checking. Again, it's like they say in woodworking, measure twice, cut once. Always looking, always checking, because it's a lot easier to make little movements and little adjustments. It's kind of tough to go back. The other rule I have is I do not go to the next bend until I have the previous bends finished. So here you can see I'm spending time making sure that labial bow fits really perfect the way I want before I ever start bending, going over the occlusion. So things look good. So now here you can see when I position this loop here, now this wire here is actually a little bit mesial to the interproximal there between the cuspid and the bicuspid. So what I need to do is come in here and just widen that out a little bit. Open that loop up just a little teeny bit. There, now I got it, fits right in there. So now I'm going to start bending this wire up over the occlusion. To me, the wire coming through the occlusion, which is going to be between those two red lines, is the most important part of what we're doing. You can get away with being a little sloppy here or a little sloppy on the inside. Here, that wire really needs to be bent very, very carefully so that it fits very intimately in here. Because if you leave it too high, it can interfere with the occlusion. You leave it too low, it's just not going to sit right. So again, it's a very crucial area. So here you'll find me constantly doing just little teeny bends and checking. Here I check quite a bit. So I put the initial curve in there to curve it in there. So now I've got that wire seating in that area, and now it's ready for me to make my initial bend. And what I'll do is I'll come in here and I'll make a mark right where I want to put that bend at. And so here, my initial bend, just a little one. So you can see I just made just that little bend, not a lot. And the reason is I want to make sure I'm making it in the right spot. So I position my labial bow, and again, try to be always consistent in how you position it back on. So here I can see, no, it's still away a little bit. I need to bend a little bit more in. So I come back here, bend that a little bit more in. Again, I've got to go a little more in. So you can see I'm constantly checking I'm not going to go to the next bend until I've got this one just where I want it. So I keep positioning that there. And now I see that original little bend I made is actually too high up on the wire. So I need to come down a little bit more to come across that occlusion. That's why you never want to do a heavy bend. You know, you want to do just, again, a little bit. Always a little bit. Especially right in this position here. So now I can see that, you know, this is really pretty close in there. Boy, it comes right over that embrasure. Fitting good. Now, a lot of times I may have to take this part of this wire and curve it a little bit one way or the other if I want to wrap it around the cuspid or if I want to wrap it around the bi. So I'm finding I'm going to have to curve slightly this way because of this little bit of curvature I see right in here. And it's going to be very subtle. So I look, see where I want to make that. Put a little mark. So I don't know if you can see how subtle that little curve is, but again, you can see just a very slight. And I come here and check. But again, I've got to go just maybe a little bit more. So I come in here, do that a little bit more. So you can see again, now just it's a little bit more, but you can see I'm just doing very little bends at this point. I mean, I'm not doing anything really severe. That looks good. Now I'm still up a little bit. I want to come down a little bit more because we've got to start, you know, we want this wire fitting right along that tissue in interproximal there. So I got to come a little bit down more. So I'll come in here, a little bit more of a bend. So again, as you can see, the bends I'm making are very, very small at this point. I want to take my time making sure I'm getting this to fit just as perfect as I can. Now what I'm seeing is that this wire is hitting this tissue right here. That is, right there, that little red dot is, that's where that wire hits. So what I have to do is take that wire and come up and then over that little bump that's there in the tissue. That we don't want to trim away. That you want the wire to fall. So I look and see what I want. So I'm going to make, I put a little mark in front of that bump and on the other side. And I take it and I go up, down. So now you can see we got a little teeny bump in the wire there. And I check. So you can see I've just done a little bit. So again, now you can see how that wire fits a lot better right in there, coming up over that little bump of tissue. So I'm going to keep bending that wire down into the pallet now. So it's looking now, but you can see how the wire is really kind of going more into here. I really now at this point want that wire going more in to the middle of the pallet. So I'm going to curve it back towards the posterior, but I want to make sure that I'm curving it, and I want to start kind of right where that bump was at. So that's where I'll hold that wire here, and I want to come in here and just give it a slight bend. So now you can see that wire kind of goes like this and slightly starts going that way. One thing you'll see me doing all the time when I'm making these is I'm always checking. I'm always doing just little bends. I'm not doing a lot of bends at any one time. In fact, I'm always making sure that, you know, the bend I'm doing is where I want it before I ever go to the next bend. Because if you don't do that, you'll end up getting way down the road and things will be off, and it'll be very difficult, if not impossible, to correct. So at this point you can see this wire fits kind of along the roof of the mouth really good. You want a little bit of space between the wire and the roof of the mouth. Generally it's going to be in like a millimeter range. If it's too far away, the acrylic has to be really thick there. If it's too close, then the wire will show through the acrylic and the pallet eventually can pull out. But once I get it pretty close where I want, I come in here, I use what's called a 3-prong, and I will simply put a little bend on the bottom. That just makes it so that wire won't twist in the acrylic. It provides a kind of an anchor point in the acrylic, so you're not going to get any twisting. So at this point, we've got one leg of this done. Now, one thing I've noticed here is that the wires kind of migrate a little bit gingerly as I've been bending this. That's okay at this point. I don't mind it a little bit on the more gingival side. If you're going to make, if you're going to err on one side, being a little more gingival is better than being a little more incisal. But that is something that you can change, once we get, in clinically in the mouth, as you can change, because of the loops, it allows you some flexibility. Now we're going to go over to the other side and bend that wire over. Very important that you make sure that you hold this wire in its position while you're doing this bend. If you don't hold this properly, you go in and do all this, and then you go to seat it, and this won't fit. Again, always making sure you're holding the wire consistently from bend to bend. So one thing we can see, the wire is away a little bit. I need to take that loop, bend it a little bit towards the tissue. There we go, that's a little better. Before you can see it was out a little bit. And again, you can see these are just very, very subtle movements. It isn't like I am doing a lot of bending when I'm doing this. But every time I do that little bend, I'm always checking. I'm always making sure that before I go to the next one, there, now I've got that pretty close where I want it. And again, you want some clearance, again, in that millimeter and a half range. So now at this point, I will start here and start bending that wire towards the tissue to get me ready to going across the occlusal, the occlusion right between the cusp and the bi. So here again, I'm just subtly bending that wire in. I would suggest, doing it. Now I did a little too much, so now it's pushing away. So again, I'm going to come back here, just take a little bit of that out. Now that sits in there really nice and passive, nothing's pushing. So now I'm ready to start this next bend. As you can see that, for any kind of real critical areas, I'm always making a mark. You can use a Sharpie marker. I get a fine point one. These are arch markers we use in the clinic, in the orthodontic clinic. We can use these in the mouth and stuff, but again, it provides just a little where we can make just that little mark. And it just lets me know where I want to do the bend. And it depends on where I place the mark. So again, you can see just a little one, not a big bend. I'm not trying to do that whole bend at one time. At this point, I just really want to see where this can sit fairly passive in there. So as we can see here, boy, that's pulled out of the way. So obviously I bent something too much here. So I'm going to go back, take a little bit out, seat it back down. So this is better, but still, it's out a little bit more than it should be. So I want to keep going, then I'll go backwards till I can get that. So there you can see now, that sits in there much better. I'm hardly even holding it. So I can come in here and go, okay, now I can continue my bending on this side. And I'm again going to make another mark. This one's just a little above the one I made previously to start that. Again, just a little bend, especially right in here. You really want to take your time where we're crossing the occlusion, because to me that's the most important, because once that's in there and you make your retainer, you cannot change that. We can change a labial bow, that's why we've got the loops in there. We can make adjustments, we can move it up or down, definitely do things. You cannot change this chunk of the wire once you put the plastic on it. So again, it's just something I keep watching, looking, little bends. Now again, we get to a point where we've got a little bump of tissue right in here. Kind of right where I made that little red mark there. So again, what I want to do, just like before, I'll put 2 marks on either side. And I'll put a little bump in the wire. To get it across that, just a little hump. Now sometimes you don't have that. Sometimes that's really flush there and this wire is almost straight coming through there. Everybody's different. So, but you want to really adapt and change that to meet those differences. So again, we can see here again that now I've got that bump where I want it. Now I want to keep working that down. So we can really see how this is really fitting nice and intimately through here. To me, that's the critical part. Now from here down, it's not near as critical. You can go a little bit quicker there. But again, if this is your first couple times doing this, really take your time. Because again, if you try to go too fast, you're going to end up with a piece of wire that's bent and not fitting. Now here's a situation where you can see here where we've got just a little, kind of a little valley depression in the pallet, or right where the rugai starts. So again, I just simply want to kind of bend that wire up over that, because I do want kind of that whole length of wire. And again, I'll use my 3-prong, kind of put a little step up, step out. So you can see now how that fits right up over that little humped area. And then I'll come back in and I'll put my little bend in there. So at this point you can see, I'm not holding that wire anywhere. Fits pretty good all around, not too bad. So that's that's the process that you go through when you want to do the labial bow. It's probably of making a Hawley, it's the more difficult part, just because you have a lot of bends with the loops here, and also taking your time coming across the occlusion. Because again, you want to really make sure this really fits in there really nice. So again, this is seated here, this is here. Now we can change this. I can see maybe I'm a little bit off here. Why? Once I get this made and stuff, I can change that subtly. As far as how it works, it doesn't matter if this wire is a little bit up or down, left to right, it's still going to work the same. The only difference will be is just patients will say, hey, how come the wire's a little bit higher on one side? That's the only, it's not going to affect the function and how the appliance works. But to me, that's the toughest. That's why I do this first, because it's kind of the more difficult wire to bend. As we do the clasps and stuff, those tend to be a little bit easier. So with me, when I do make all my own appliances, I always kind of start with the hardest wire and then work my way to the easier ones. But that's how you make the labial bow for the Hawley retainer.